brush that fringe over your eyes and put on the entire tube of eyeliner. We're going on MySpace on the 2000s Chart Show.
The 2000s Chart Show. The 2000s Chart Show.
The podcast celebrating the music of the 2000s. Every week we are reliving the top 40 countdown from this week 20 years ago, telling the stories of all the new entries. I am Samuel Spencer, and this week we are also the podcast that when it first met you was wanting more, but you were doing that Girl Next Door. What'd you do that for? That from Lily Allen's Smile. Lily Allen, about to be one of the biggest artists of the year, and it all begins right here. She is one of 9 new entries trying to knock Nelly Furtado off the top spot. She is joined by Kelly Clarkson, trying a 5th, I think, single from her album. Also the return of Razorlight. Their last song got all the way to number 2. There's a lot of momentum behind Razorlight getting a number 1. Will it be enough? Or will the British record buying public prefer a new wave of indie bands, including the Guillemots and one of my favourite bands of the entire decade, the Long Blondes? All of that to come on this episode. So I'm excited, you're excited. Let's get right into that top 40.
The top 40.
That, of course, means we start with the bargain bin, the songs from 30 to 40.
Bargain bin.
Songs that flopped and songs that are on their way to the top
40.
This is Primal Scream with Country Girl, 7 weeks that's been on the chart. Let's get right into our first new entry.
39.
An artist with his last top 40 of the 2000s. 8 years prior to this, he had managed to get all the way to number 1 with Praise You, but there's not much praise left in the UK for Fatboy Slim, coming into this chart at 39 with the first single from his greatest hits collection, That Old Pair of Jeans. Time to jump off this negative cycle we've built. Fatboy Slim would not have another hit for 7 years after this until Eat Sleeve Rave Repeat got to number 3 in 2013. His 2000s sort of just went out with an absolute thud. He managed to end the 90s with 5 top 10 hits in a row, and then only managed 2 top 10s in the entirety of the 2000s. Sunset Bird of Prey in October 2000 and Star 69 May 2001. He does, however, have a Guinness World Record for the most UK number 1 singles by one musician as a member of different acts. On the main singles chart, number 1s as part of the House Martins, 1986's Caravan of Love. Dub Be Good To Me, a 1990 number 1 for Beats International. Praise You, his Fatboy Slim track, got to number 1 in 99. He also got to number 1 on the hip hop and R&B singles chart with his band Freak Power, Turn On, Tune In, Cop Out, and to the top of the dance singles chart as Pizza Man, a 1995 song called Sex on the Streets, and as the Mighty Dubcats in 96 with Just Another Groove. Some people blamed the move away from dance music and towards guitar bands for the failure of Fatboy Slim in the 2000s. Certainly his last album was Palookaville, which was his lowest selling album ever, basically. Norman Kooks said it was down more to the fact that it was a less commercial sound. Although he said he was happy to take his foot off the gas for a bit and receive less tabloid attention. He, in an interview, talks about one of the happiest moments that he had in the 2000s was leaving the BBC when there was loads of paparazzi outside of it and no one caring. The Guardian, though, summed up maybe what was more the problem with that album. The truth may be that it sounded like an album made by a man who was sick of being Fatboy Slim, at least in the studio. The best moments were those that least resembled his earlier work. And so he's really putting a full stop here on the Fatboy Slim project with a greatest hits collection. This, as I said, the first single for it, featuring vocals from the American rapper Lateef the Truth Speaker, who had also appeared on the previous Fatboy Slim tracks Wonderful Night and Champion Sound. He also may have wanted to take a bit of a break around this point because he was a pretty heavy-grade alcoholic. So in, I think, 2008, he releases an album as Brighton Port Authority, which is him collaborating with numerous artists, David Byrne, Dizzy Rascal, Martha Wainwright. And he says he released this album after finding the tapes in his studio and realising that he had been so drunk when recording them, he'd completely forgotten that he'd made them. He, however, got sober after his then wife, DJ Zoe Ball, said she would leave him if he didn't stop drinking. He went to a rehab facility in 2009 and has since been sober for 15 years. Plus, he would have some successes in the coming years. He did the soundtrack for a immersive national theatre play called Here Lies Love about the Philippine First Lady Imelda Marcos. That was another collaboration with David Byrne that played on Broadway and in London. And he's become a very in-demand DJ as EDM music has become the sort of go-to dance trend in America. I once saw him at Glastonbury in 2013, this would have been, and it was the year where everybody was sure that Daft Punk were going to do a secret set, and so him and Zoe Ball came on stage in like actual Daft Punk helmets. They must have spent a fortune on them for this stupid prank. Made everyone in the crowd like lose their mind until they pull their heads off, and it's just Fatboy Slim, who is... It's actually harder to get him to stop playing at Glastonbury than getting him to do it. I would say the highlight of his 2010s, though, was in 2016, where at the Brighton Fringe, he played a Baby Loves Disco set for preschool children. And he seems to be very happy DJing. I saw him a few years ago. He was great. He said in 2025, if I did make a new record, then it would be a very average record. I prefer not to waste mine or other people's time with that. I feel like I've made enough records and there's a body of work there that's good enough. So quite why in recent years he came out of single retirement to re-release a version of Praise You featuring Rita Ora on vocals, I don't know. Just again, the power of Rita Ora to, despite being the most mediocre artist on the planet, getting people to work with her. Thank God it's the 2000s. We don't have to talk about Rita Ora. Instead, we have to talk about
38.
Solo music and Kimberly with Fade. A few more old tracks on this chart before we get to the next new entry.
37.
T.I. with Why You Wanna.
Feel like fate, hate to make a mistake.
36.
Danny California by Red Hot Chili Peppers. Me and my friends have become obsessed with this Red Hot Chili Peppers track. It's called Emmett Remus, which is the word summertime backwards, and it's all about having this sort of sexy time with a British girl. You know that Taylor Swift like London Boy song? It's like that if it was even worse. It's just weird hearing American artists be like, go to Leicester Square. And then we learnt, to add insult to injury, that he'd written it about Mel C from the Spice Girls. What a world we live in. By the way, if you were listening to this podcast on Patreon, you would have just heard a clip of that alongside longer clips of each of the songs we're talking about. Just a little plug there.
Shameless plug.
Talking about songs we're talking about, let's talk about one of those songs that we're talking about, shall we?
35.
Our second new entry on this chart comes from a very much C-tier indie band, a band that even I, who was deeply embedded in chart indie music at this point, only vaguely was aware of. This is Larrikin Love with their, I would say, controversially titled Downing Street Kindling.
So I will burn a fire in Westminster.
This their second attempt to make the top 40 following their track Ed Wood, which got to 49 in April. The band described themselves as urchin punk, reggae dub, London calypso kids. It won't surprise you to learn they are all white. And I call them fairly insufferable. Most notable in this song, the chorus goes, but England has nothing more to offer me. Everything that I adore came well before 1984. Edward Larrikin, the leader of the band, said of this to Drowned in Sound, I just think this country is really draining. There are so many things you might want to do, but everything about England right now feels so constraining. There's so much more out there beyond this land, and one thing I'm trying to do is go out there and see as much, gather as much information as I possibly can. I think I've taken as much from English culture as I could ever possibly want, so therefore it doesn't have anything else to offer me. I would say the worst part about England is that it's full of people who call themselves urchin punk, reggae dub, London calypso kids, but there we go. Also interesting that you say that everything that you love came well before 1984, and yet you seem to have taken a lot of inspiration from the Smiths and the Libertines, who, I'm just going to check my notes, yes, did both exist later than 1984. I'm glad to be starting this episode with so much fury at a band who have really done nothing wrong. Band formed by siblings Edward and Mikko Larrikin. Went through a slightly traumatic childhood. When I was 8, something really bad happened. Certain things, and they weren't very nice, and it had a huge effect on all of us. This was when my sister was born, and my mother wasn't at all well mentally. There was a string of about 10 men living with us, and they were all very strange. It was a very weird time, and I was like the man of the house for a long time, trying to hold everything down, and that was just crazy. He, however, found solace through music and formed a band around him, allowing him to take the poems that he'd written and turn them into music. However, he did have a habit of lying in interviews and to his bandmates, who were Alfie Ambrose, Cos Kerrigan and Rob Skipper. One of the things apparently he lied to them for ages about taking beatboxing lessons. I would say that's fundamentally incurious of them if they never actually asked him to do any beatboxing, which surely would have instantly shown that he wasn't very good at it. You know, he's no Daniel Bedingfield. And just casually lying to your bandmates, never a good sign. Larrikin Love would announce that they had broken up by May 2007. We'll see whether that's true. I believe they have one more single coming on this chart. They have two more, in fact. They'll be back with Happy as Annie in September 2006. All of these from their album The Freedom Spark, which was split into 3 sections: Hate, Fairy Tale and Freedom. I'm guessing this one is from Hate. We'll see where the other one's from later. I bet you cannot wait. Be sleepless nights all the way until we reveal that, I'm sure. But I'm sorry, we have to talk about another new entry, another completely flop indie band, if we're honest. It's because they have an awful name. They're called Chord, and this is their track, and in fact their only top 40 hit, Winter.
34.
There is one thing I will admit that I really like that Chord did. So I was a subscriber to Q Magazine in 2006, and in August they released a CD with one of the issues which featured bands of the day doing covers of 80s tracks. There's some great stuff on that album. An amazing version of David Bowie's Let's Dance by the Futureheads. Boy Kill Boy doing Joe Jackson's It's Different for Girls. I think we've talked about that before on this show. And Chord do a version of Spirits in the Material World by the Police, which I think is much better than the actual Police version. But none of this stopped Chord getting any more than one top 40 hit. They are a band from Norfolk, signed by Island Records for a 5-album deal that would only actually result in one album from James Leeds, Phil Davison, Mike Jackson and Andrew Walsh. They toured with bands like Orson and Cub, speak about flop indie bands. With a lot of these bands, they aren't able to make many sales, but they get great reviews from critics. Chord didn't have that either. NME, it seems, gave them a particularly vicious review, leading the band to strike out at NME, saying they're more about fashion and style than music. They love the horrors who look good, but their music is rubbish. And I disagree. I might be one of the only people in the world who think this, but I think the first Horrors album is actually pretty amazing. I think we get to talk about the Horrors a little bit later on. Sheena is a Parasite might just make the chart. We'll see. I would say they generally don't seem to like being in a band, do Chord, like when they told the BBC, I really dislike videos, and describing touring with Cub, some of it has been dreadful. Although that's an understandable sentiment, seeing as they were playing in Portsmouth when the ceiling of the gig collapsed on them during their set. We got to the chorus and I didn't even see what happened. Phil just stopped. I thought he dropped a stick and all this crap started flying in front of us and he was just buried. I was fine at the front of the stage and I just span around and Phil was trapped. It was amazing because it didn't hit any of us, it just hit the gear. So the drum kit was covered and the amplifiers were covered, but somehow it missed us. So Phil couldn't get off the stage because the ceiling was all around him, but he was fine. The audience were like, was that supposed to happen? Is that how it is? Cub's gear was covered in fiberglass and had to hoover it all out before the next night, bless them. I've still got bits of rock and stuff in my keyboard rolling around if you give it a good shake. They also, one of the reasons why they got dropped by their record company was because they were expensive. They had to record their debut album twice. They first did it with the producer of Coldplay's X and Y, Danton Supple, but they weren't happy with the sound, so then they ended up working with Youth, the guy who produced The Verve's Urban Hymns, which all would have been fine if the album had charted, but it didn't. And so by March 2007, Island dropped them. They said for a while they were going to keep going and release their second album. However, they did split in 2008, although were finally able to release their second album in 2011. But it got nowhere near the charts, so it doesn't really bother us. It just exists somewhere. So goodbye Chord and hello to
33.
Henrietta by the Fratellis. Month on the chart for that one.
32.
Lupe Fiasco's Kick Push, his ode to skateboarding. I was going to do a metaphor there for of skateboarding and being on the chart, but I literally was don't know anything about skateboarding. I was I don't know. It's ollieing its way down the chart. Is that a thing you can do? Don't know. Point is, it's dropped 5 places in its second week to number 32. And ahead of it is a song that I would absolutely love to leave this chart. Probably my least favourite song on this top 40.
It's hard to control myself.
Been here for 9 weeks. I think it begins the trend of female vocalists that sound like they were AI generated onto the song. Obviously, this is way before AI, but I would put this in the same category as Britney's Scream and Shout, Britney's Mind Your Business, and Britney's Tiny Dancer. Who else is in that trend? Oh, Rihanna's Friend of Mine. That's not even a duet, and yet she sounds like she was AI generated onto it. So that's number 31. And
30.
Oh, wow. I said that Control Myself is the worst song on this list. It's because I did not know that coming up was Is This the Way to the World Cup by Tony Christie.
40 years, don't go unstuck.
29.
The real song of the World Cup, in that it's about being exhausted and furious all the time. It's Keen with Is It Any Wonder in their 6th week. That takes us out of the bargain bin and onto
Song that should have been this week.
new at
28.
This band would become my entire personality for basically from, I think I got into them late, so 2007, through to basically the end of my university time. I thought all of their songs were really about me, even though they were sort of, couldn't love me less, sort of about my life, but they'll always hold a firm spot in my heart. It's the Long Blondes. This is their chart debut at 28, Weekend Without Makeup.
There are wants and there are needs.
Only 2 albums, Someone to Drive You Home and Couples, but those 2 albums were more important to me than basically anything. My sort of twin obsessions of the early 2000s, Lady Gaga and the Long Blondes. And I have to say, there's only one of those that I'm not completely tired and irritated with, and that's all I'll say about the album Mayhem. Anyway, so most of their songs I thought were speaking exactly to my life, which they kind of weren't. Like their next single is called Once and Never Again, which is about a sort of older lesbian trying to seduce a young woman. But I was like, yeah, it's about my life. But there is a sort of suburban feeling to their tracks about the sort of being bored in suburbia, which really did chime with me in this time, especially as I sort of head into my exams and I'm sort of looking ahead at getting out of suburban Bristol as soon as I can. It spoke to me quite profoundly. Like the beginning of this song, another weekend without makeup, another evening to myself, well, I guess I won't be having the time of my life tonight. That pretty much summed up my teenage years. Don't cry for me. It's fine. Now I do this podcast. So that's success, right? The band formed in Sheffield where they all came for university, became part of what's known as the New Yorkshire scene, Arctic Monkeys and the Cribs, sort of the figureheads of that movement. This band very much not part of that, feel very different to those others. They were Kate Jackson, Dorian Kooks, Renee Hollis, Emma Chaplin and Screech Louder, the drummer. Dorian Kooks told The Independent, "We all knew each other because we went to the same gigs, charity shops and second-hand record stores. We were the only people that looked like we did in Sheffield at the time, and you can tell someone's on the same wavelength as you just by what they wear. I don't know how the band started. It was just one of those pub ideas. I knew Kate just from seeing her around and we all decided that she would make a perfect singer. It didn't matter what her voice was like." They self-described themselves as Sheffield's most obnoxious band. They said they do not listen to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, The Door or Bob Dylan, instead inspired by 3 sets of brothers. The Male Brothers, the American lunatics that make up the band Sparks, the Marx Brothers, American lunatics who make up the Marx Brothers, and the Bewlay Brothers, the track from David Bowie's Hunky Dory album. Their sort of perfect vision for the band was that they would be a fantasy pop group made up of Nico, the singer from the Velvet Underground, Nancy Sinatra, Diana Dawes, the sort of lusty British actress, and Barbara Windsor. Sexy and literate, flippant and heartbreaking all at once. Now, you could be thinking to yourself, this all sounds incredibly pretentious, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but I lapped it up, because pretentiousness is all you have in the suburbs, okay? This is what a band should be, to me. I think it should be, I mean, I think their music's amazing, but it should be like 30% music, 70% world building, really. Yes, they defined themselves against the other Sheffield bands, Dorian telling Drowned in Sound. "We couldn't really do the Arctic Monkeys type realist thing. We're just the complete opposite to that. The only reason we formed a band was to get away from reality. We all just used to sit at our desks and dream about doing other things." And Dorian Kooks has recently sort of reflected on his time on the band. This was to Loud and Quiet, remembering the point in which they saw sort of exciting indie music turn into landfill indie, and it was actually in supporting the Arctic Monkeys. "They asked us to support them at a homecoming show. It was full of proper lads. I'd never seen anything like it at an indie gig, and we went on and immediately chants of puffs, puffs, puffs started, followed by monkeys, monkeys. We did 3 songs and walked off. People were throwing bottles and stuff. I remember saying to Alex afterwards, 'Do you know what, mate? Well done, you've done it. Because once you get to that level where knuckleheads get involved, that's where the money is.' That was the turning point, though. I remember thinking that isn't what we signed up for. We came from an old school indie background, and up until then, it seemed like the whole scene was like that until we came across this very laddie environment. Which sort of chimes with what we've talked about on this podcast before. The soccer AMification of indie. All of these sort of very laddie guys who like football getting into indie music via the Arctic Monkeys. It brings in the sort of people who want gigs to feel like football terraces rather than places where art happens, which is the biggest problem. Although, to be fair to them, the Arctic Monkeys, maybe did cause this, but they have tried their utmost to shed their audience with ever weirder albums. But not every band did. A particular band that are the subject of the Long Blondes hatred are the Automatic, who they toured with on an NME tour. So we did the NME New Music Tour with Forward Russia, who were fucking great. The other two bands on the bill, Boy Kill Boy, dreadful. Lovely guys, one of them lent me his shoes one night on stage, bless him, but dreadful. Very boring. The other band on the tour I fucking hated, and they were all a bunch of pricks. The Automatic. When you heard them soundcheck every day for 3 weeks, you'd want to rip someone's head off. One gig at a university, we had a large shared dressing room, and they were acting like kids and doing our heads in, and throwing loads of shit around like tomato sauce, and we were telling them not to do it, because obviously someone has to clean that up. Then the best thing ever happened. The janitor for the building came along afterwards and said, "Who's done this?" We grassed them in, and he forced them to clean it all up. That's also a very interesting thing about 2006. The indie bands all start to fall out. We're going to get that with Razorlight later on in this show. So in February 2006, they were named the most exciting unsigned band in Britain. They won the NME Radar Award, which had previously been won by Franz Ferdinand and Kaiser Chiefs. They, in April 2006, signed to Rough Trade and began recording their debut album with the bassist from Pulp, Steve Mackey. Things should have been huge for them, but they weren't. But that makes me love them all the more, and we'll explore why they were maybe just too weird for the mainstream populace when their next single, the aforementioned Once and Never Again, comes out later in the year. I'm so happy I got to share my interest in this band with you guys out there. I really recommend you listen to both of their albums. And their singles collection, singles actually, amazing. It's sort of a more lo-fi sound, but some great songs on there like Peterborough and Darts. And if you don't love a band that have titles like Peterborough and Darts, then what are you doing? I don't know. But I do know
27
is Beatfreakz Somebody's Watching Me. They've really been lurking in those bushes for a long time. That's 10 weeks on the chart for that. All American Rejects' Dirty Little Secret is being told at number 26. Shh.
26
I'll keep you my dirty little secret.
The Kooks Are Being Naive at number
25
I know she knows.
and Embrace have the world at your feet at
24
which does beg the question, where exactly they're standing. They're sort of floating in space with the world at their feet. Yeah, anyway.
23
Another band that are going to be too weird for true success, but 23 for their first track, not bad going. This song is called Made Up Love Song number 43. The band is the Guillemots, or does Guillemots, not to be like my mum who just puts the at the beginning of any band name. Oh, I like that band, The Blur. They're quite good, aren't they, the Oasis?
I love you through sparks and shining.
They give good quote, do the Guillemots, such as when Q put them in their, like, new to Q section, where they put the sort of upcoming bands and the interview begins. Do you know it's possible to give a woman an orgasm through the right bass frequency? So says Guillemots lead singer Fife Dangerfield. It's true. Adding to the conversation is their double bassist, the amazingly named Aristizabal Hawks, who says it's true. It works for me anyway. One day we'll play a gig using just that note. Certainly it wouldn't be the weirdest thing that they had done musically. This album, Through the Window Pane, includes such things as biscuit tin percussion, solos played on typewriters, and live gigs would often feature them marching through the audience, very much leading me to think they're sort of an English-eccentric version of Arcade Fire. Dangerfield and Hawks had met as teenagers on the improvisational jazz circuit, which is where I meet all my friends too. They were going to form a improvisational jazz band when Hawks went to work on cruise ships as a musician, and then returned in 2004. They formed a band around them, also including a Brazilian guitarist called MC Lord McGraw and Scottish drummer Rican Cowell and Scottish drummer Greg Stewart. Dangerfield said of their sound, "In the 60s it was taken as read that you would make pop music but experiment at the same time. We want to bring that back. It freaks us out how many ideas we've got." As for where their band name came, they told The Guardian, "I went bird watching with my mum and dad a lot as a kid and have these really good memories of colonies of seabirds along the cliff edges. There's a band called Kittywakes already. Razor Bills sound like a heavy metal band and puffins are shit. So Guillemots it is." The first time, I think, on this podcast, which we've been doing for a long time now, in which a band has started a feud with puffins. You know, you never had Nadine from Girls Aloud being like, I hate puffin, flyer, puffins, I hate puffins. That's what you come for, isn't it, really? Come for the pop music, stay for the bad accents. So we're in an interesting point for landfill indie, I think. Look, yes, in general, indie music is getting worse, but also there are these little weirdo bands that are getting chances to pop up and get like 1 or 2 top 40s, which is always cool. And in fact, they played this song on Top of the Pops, with the guitarist playing into a set of mirrors. The sort of weird things that you get from the Guillemots. I saw them at T4 on the beach, in which they felt very out of place, sort of performing in between like Bass Hunter and Kelly Rowland. But Drowned in Sound loved them. They gave this track a 10 out of 10. A softly glissanding synthesizer throbs while singer Fife Dangerfield sings to me, mirroring my every thought. It's one of those melodies that you dream about being able to write and sing, but not even this can prepare you for the elegantly controlled ascent that builds and climbs and works its way into every single part of your being. For a song that could resonate powerfully in a simpler guise, Guillemots' layering and texturing rather than detracting from its intent merely conspire to enthrall in an even more vital and life-affirming fashion. There is no way in which I can physically take anything away from this experience. This is utter perfection in its purest and most wondrous form. It's that kind of ecstatic praise that led them to come 5th in the BBC Sound of 2006 poll, which was won by Corinne Bailey-Rae, and it got them a Mercury Prize nomination, although they lost out to the Arctic Monkeys. A very different approach to indie music, I would say, than the Arctics. They told The Guardian their target was to make music that captures the feeling of lying on a beach at midnight looking up at the stars. We'll see whether they manage that in September when their second single, Trains to Brazil, comes out. So that's weirdo outsider indie, but we have to return to the most mainstream of pop, that classic pop problem when you release one single too many from an album. Although I would argue this is 2 singles too many, seeing as Kelly Clarkson's other single could only make it to the 20s. She still thought to release another one. It's here at
22.
This is Kelly Clarkson with the, would you believe it, last single from her album Breakaway, the self-titled Breakaway. So 3 top 10 singles in a row from this album, Since You've Been Gone, Behind These Hazel Eyes and Because of You. Then Walk Away could only make it to 21, and this doing one place worse. Not her lowest charting hit to date. That would be 2003's Low, which made it to number 35 despite being on the Love Actually soundtrack. But there was literally no point to release this as a single, especially when this song is 2 years old. It first released on the Princess Diaries 2 soundtrack in summer 2004. It had actually been released as a single in America at that point to tide over fans while she was recording her second album. It got to number 6 in the US 2 full years ago. But she liked it so much that she added it to her second album, and it gave her the name of that album, and it matched the record for longest stay at the top of the US Adult Contemporary chart, where it spent 21 non-consecutive weeks at number 1, a record only matched at that point by Celine Dion's A New Day Has Come, and has since been matched by Adele's Hello. Not only is this song 2 years old as a recording, but it was written even earlier than that. It was penned in 2001 when it was initially meant to go on the first Avril Lavigne album. It's in fact written by Avril alongside her songwriting collaborators. She decided it wasn't quite right for her album, and so it was offered to multiple people, the last of whom was Kelly Clarkson, who instantly identified with it. She told Contact Music, "It describes how I got into this business verbatim. I did grow up in a small town. I wanted to get out. I felt like there was something not better for me, but something different for me. I didn't feel like I fit in at school. Whether you're a DJ or if you work with computers or if you're a teacher, everyone has that point where they feel, I'm bored and this isn't what I wanted to do with my life." Some of the lines changed from the Avril version to the Kelly Clarkson version. Avril's version featured the lyric, "When the snow would fall down," which is changed by Kelly to "When the rain would fall down," because a Texan talking about snow is definitely less convincing than a Canadian. And we know all of this because Avril's version of it was released on the 20th anniversary of her first album, Let Go, back in June 2022. That album, amazing. One of the albums I know from front to back. So Kelly Clarkson releases too many singles from her album Breakaway, and arguably she will release too few from her next album, which will only give her one single in the UK. That's her album My December. It was a controversial album for Kelly Clarkson, When she submitted it to her record label, Clive Davis, the legendary head of it, asked for major changes because he thought it was lacking a radio hit. However, she refused, and it was even reported that Clive Davis offered her $10 million to remove 5 songs from it and put in more radio-friendly material, and she refused, which you have to respect her creative integrity, but also it ended up with the tour for that album being cancelled due to low ticket sales. So maybe Clive Davis was kind of right. And by the way, R.I.P. Clive Davis, who died in June 2026 at the age of 94, a legendary career probably best known for discovering Whitney Houston. So that will be the story of Kelly Clarkson's third album. We will tell more in depth when her next single, Never Again, comes out at some point next year. So stay tuned, Kelly heads. We have now SOS by Rihanna in its 12th week.
21.
It's not healthy.
And that brings us to the top 20.
The top 20.
3 Lions by Baddiel Skinner and The Lightning Seeds,
20.
which I'm sure now we are in the World Cup 2026 is right back in the top 40. I'm recording this on the 3rd of July before this week's top 40 came out, but let's see where it was last week. 39. It'll be interesting to see whether that song can make it to number 1 again for the first time in 8 years. That will be, of course, if England is celebrating its World Cup team, and we have to celebrate a huge landmark on this chart, something we've been waiting for now 19 weeks. This is the final Michael Jackson track on this chart for the time being. This a former UK number 1 single. Now it's here at number 19. The final Michael Jackson 2006 re-release is Blood on the Dance Floor. This was his 36th UK top 10 hit since his solo debut in 1972. It came from the remix album Blood on the Dance Floor, remixed the tracks from History, his previous album, which had been 2 discs, one of which was a greatest hits and the other of which was new tracks. Michael Jackson felt that the new tracks were overshadowed by his... Overshadowed? Is that a word? Outshadowed? I'm recording this in a very hot room. Language has no meaning to me anymore. The point is, people listen more to the old stuff rather than the new stuff, and so he's remixed it, trying to give it the attention he feels it deserves. A classical bit of Michael Jackson mid-90s ego, that thinking the songs that he'd literally dusted up, it was like mostly songs that had not been good enough for his previous albums. He just dusted them off and thought, oh, that'll do. But oh no, people will like that as much as Billie Jean. Yeah, sure. Guess what? They didn't. Although despite all that, I actually don't buy this song. I prefer it to anything on History, even if it is basically Smooth Criminal's uglier brother. As Number One's blog put it, the verses are a series of vocal ticks strung together, sounding more like dolphins communicating, and just as indecipherable. What's indecipherable about... Pretty clear to me. In the New York Times, they speculated whether Susie in this track, who is the killer killing people on the dance floor, is a metaphor for AIDS. I would argue that's much too subtle for Michael Jackson, who doesn't really deal in metaphors. He is the man, after all, who gave us such on-the-nose classics as Leave Me Alone and Heal the World, and make your own jokes about being on Michael Jackson's nose, what with it falling off all the time. Hard to locate. He doesn't do metaphors. Smooth Criminal is not about Reagan's fiscal policy, or the Iran-Contra affair, you know. It's about a criminal who, guess what, is a little on the unrough side. And the literalness continues. This song was actually inspired by an occasion in which there was blood on the dance floor. Teddy Riley, the producer, had been invited to a party, and he decided not to go because he was working on beats for Michael Jackson. He then learnt that at that party someone had been shot, and he was 23 at this point, and his half-brother and best friend had both been murdered. And so he took this all out into this song, Blood is on the Dance Floor, didn't tell Michael Jackson what the beat was about, and he came up with these vocals, which then Michael Jackson recorded in January 97 while he was in Montreux in Switzerland, allegedly on a mission to buy Charlie Chaplin's old house. And speaking of Charlie Chaplin, Michael Jackson is basically ancient history at this point. This will be his last chart appearance until will.i.am mixes the track The Girl Is Mine for the 25th anniversary of Thriller, which I've never heard, and I'm sure is good, because the original song is so good, and will.i.am is so good at not ruining songs. Haha, welcome to the 2000s Opposite Show.
Was crushed the black movement. Was crushed the black movement.
Yeah, I'm sure it's shit. But we don't have to find out for another 18 months. So that's a relief, isn't it? It's going to be so nice to not have to talk about Michael Jackson next week. I'm already can feel my shoulders lightening. And instead, we must talk about
18.
Foster Kill Pussycat, Oakenfold, and Brittany Murphy.
What you're lucky.
17.
Fill My Little World. That song is staying so firm on these charts. This is its 7th week on the chart, and it was like 16 for 3 weeks in a row, and is now 17.
Hey, show some love.
This is what can happen in the world of downloads.
16.
Is MyMyMy by Armand and Helden going down, down, down 4 places. And at
15.
a song coming into the top 20 on downloads alone, always a good sign. This is going to be a top 10 challenger next week. Their last single, Somewhere Else, got to number 2. Will this get Somewhere Else, aka the number 1 spot? We'll find it next week. But for now, here they are. At 15, the return of Razorlight with In the Morning.
In the morning, you know we won't remember a thing.
A rare week on this chart where there are 3 separate contenders for should have been a number 1. I would say this and the next new entry we'll be talking about are both my joint runner-ups, because which one I prefer keeps changing. Because although I know we're supposed to hate Razorlight and their second album for being the point where they fell off the rails, even Johnny Borrell has slagged off this album, as we'll get into, but I still like this song. I still think it should have been a number 1. Certainly prefer it to their next single, which has its own run for the number 1 spot. So interesting times for Razorlight. As I said, their track Somewhere Else got to number 2, and this had been sort of released as a stopgap between albums 1 and 2, but it was such a success that a lesser band, and I'm just going to say it, Editors, would have then probably re-released one of their old tracks to capitalise on the fame. Razorlight, to their credit, didn't do that, and they waited until the new album was recorded until they released something else. This song was first heard by the public in August 2004, when a version of it was recorded for a Paris fashion show, and it was this version that I'm sorry Razorlight, I'll send you 79p if you want, illegally downloaded. Shout out Bearshare. There's a few songs like this that I'm sure fellow illegal downloaders can empathise with me here, where you had the wrong version of it, but because it was the version you listened to all the time, it's the version that you love, and the actual version sounds weird to you. There's 3 songs I can particularly think of that this is true for. Can't Stand Me Now by The Libertines, and in a few years, Ulysses by Franz Ferdinand. That's the worst one, because I think actually the weird demo version that I have is pretty great, and then the album version is like dire. The way they sing it is so out of beat, it's very weird. I mean, we're going to be talking about that in like 3 years' time, but yeah, the version I had of In the Morning I prefer, but I've now learnt to love this actual official version, although Drowned in Sound were not so keen. Razorlight talked up the release of In the Morning in the only manner they know, self-generated hyperbole. Sounds more and more like a classic every day, says the band's bassist Carl DeLemo back in March. He was talking about the band's forthcoming second record, a self-titled affair, but mentioned In the Morning by name. A classic then, what do you reckon? This is the sort of song that's absolutely at home on commercial radio breakfast shows, blaring out of clock radio single speakers between bursts of bullshit chatter of the most inane nature, inoffensive to the very boundary of offence. It's the sort of song that will get you right out of bed, but the only way you're going to be alright, as the song repeatedly assures the listener, is by bludgeoning said bedside Sony appliance into tiny plastic splinters with the nearest paperweight. Failing that, a coffee mug or a drawer handle, a curtain rail, whatever comes to hand. 4 out of 10, that review. But do you know what? To my 13-year-old ears, it sounded good, which really could be another alternate name for this podcast. Johnny Borrell, of course the lead singer of Razorlight, had wanted to be a folk singer, but fell into the Dalston indie scene, which birthed the Libertines, which he was briefly a member of before falling out with Pete Doherty. His biggest issue, Johnny Borrell, was his own mouth. Here's a typical example of an interaction with a journalist. This is from The Guardian. The first time I met Borrell was in a hotel bar in Denver early in 2005. His greeting then was a belligerent rant about me not giving him any Oxbridge journalist bullshit that, as I pointed out, seemed a little rum considering A, I went to a comprehensive and a red brick, and B, later Borrell had a hissy fit at a waitress who asked him to cover his bare feet because there could be glass on the floor. Having proffered the unlikely defence that he didn't own any shoes, Borrell eventually stomped out onto the street, still barefoot, with a parting shot to the bemused waitress, "If you're so bothered, buy me some." But none of this, it seems, was stopping Razorlight in 2006. This album, one of those rare things in pop music, the second album that outsold a successful debut album. At the time, he said of this album. Some days it seems like the best thing in the world, and others you don't know why you're going to clog up the world with that nonsense. And he would eventually be very critical of this time, such as when he talked about the song Before I Fall to Pieces, a later single from this album. Here's where we totally fucked it up for everyone. I think that you can say that in 2006, at the start of this video, music was in quite an interesting place. Then 3.5 minutes later, it's fucked. In interviews in 2006, he's making a very strong case that he's cleaned up his act. He's not doing the ridiculous quotes. He's not sort of ranting at journalists. But there is problems within the band, as are noted in this Guardian article. The journalist notices, for example, that the band and the crew, when they're offered 2 taxis away from a gig, they all rush for the one that Johnny's not in. He distances himself from the other band members at meal times. The journalist sees him interacting with the bassist, who, cannot even be bothered to have a conversation with him. And when they were in Tokyo, apparently, the tour manager had spent the whole day trying to get a better hotel for Johnny because he didn't want to stay with the other members of the band. And so it may not be a surprise that soon he will fire most of the band and it essentially becomes a solo project, to the extent that when I saw them, it must have been in 2011, it was just Johnny and some complete randomers. And also, he couldn't really resist. The band that he took aim at this time was the Kooks, meaning it's the return of one of my favourite segments from the show, which we haven't had in a long time, and I'm so glad it's back. This is Don't Be Mad Please, Stop the Hating. Our guide to the greatest feuds of the 2000s. This between Razorlight and the Kooks kicked off when Johnny Borrell said in Enemy, "I heard their single on the radio the other day and it sounds like fucking Avril Lavigne. If he can live with himself after that production, and if he feels that he has to slag off people to keep up, then I'm sure his nights are long and those moments of doubt are really painful. For a start, he models his style on me, and that record is the most horrible thing I've ever heard. It sounds like the band are literally rolling over, sticking their ass in the air and begging Radio 1 to fuck them. So fuck the Kooks, fuck them." The Kooks, I have to say, give a pretty weak sauce reply. They do one gig where they're this one's for Johnny Borrell, and they play Naive. Wow. Where'd you learn that? On the mean streets of stage school? Anyway, eventually the Fratellis would wade in, desperate for some attention. They said, "We were driving around London and America came on the radio, and for some reason, who knows what, we all burst out laughing at precisely the same time. Johnny Borrell is a cock, and we hate the Kooks as well. Their music is fucking awful." Anyway, they will all be back with a little song called America in October 2006. A song you may remember being massive. We'll find out how massive in the autumn. But moving very quickly past the Lost Prophets at 14 and on to the highest new entry this week at number
13.
Coming in on downloads alone, so another person guaranteed to shoot up this chart. Exactly how far, we'll find out next week. But here is the debut of a star of the 2000s and since. Eventually we'll have 3 number ones. All begins here with Lily Allen's Smile, eventually the 11th biggest selling song of 2006, selling 228,000 copies, in between No Tomorrow by Orson and Justin Timberlake's Sexy Back. Yes, the first single from Lilith Allen, For It Is She. 21 years old Lily Allen, of course the daughter of the comedian Keith Allen, himself no stranger to the top 10, appearing in the music video for World in Motion, a number 1 for New Order in 1990, and being part of Fat Les, whose track Vindaloo was a number 2 hit in 1998. Miranda Sawyer, speaking in The Guardian, "Last month I used my column in this magazine to bemoan today's lack of proper pop stars, the ones who talk the talk as well as walk the tight-trousered walk, who know that the music's only part of the job and personality's the rest. Anyway, just days later, the editor called me up all excited and said, 'I think I found you one.' Lily Allen had put up 4 of her chirpy pop star songs and within weeks they'd spread like internet flu. She now has a staggering 24,000 friends on her page. How quaint. Parlophone has rush-released her first single LDN, and the limited edition 7-inch is reselling for 40 quid on eBay. Lily is a genuine no-PR punters love it success, which is fantastic. But even more promisingly, she is hilarious. Of course, like Sandy Tom before her, instantly there were questions about whether she was a real MySpace success or whether it had been staged by her record company, especially as she admitted to Miranda Sawyer, she'd only ever performed in public before in school assemblies. But she has claimed in many interviews that although she did have a record deal, when she did the MySpace, her record company had no idea about it. She told Pitchfork, My record company didn't even know what MySpace was. About 3 weeks later, after I set it up, my manager called me and he was like, I think you ought to set this thing up. It's called MySpace or something. And I was like, already done it. She had met her manager George Lamb in Ibiza, and yes, I think it is that George Lamb, the one who became a T4 presenter. They actually met after he saved her from a sticky situation in Ibiza. I was off it and made friends with this guy who's now my manager. He took my mobile off me, rang my mother and told her he'd booked me on a flight home so I could sort myself out. He then found her first record deal. They gave her £25,000 to produce an album. They didn't really know what to do with her, and so she met Lady Sovereign, who told her all about MySpace and encouraged her to set up a profile. And it's this that's launching her to a top 20 hit, and next week, almost certainly a top 5 one. So the daughter of the actor Keith Allen, who left the family home when she was 4, but still a big presence in her life. She was raised by her mother, the film producer Alison Owen. It seems that Ibiza wasn't the only place where she was going wild before this record deal. She talks about going on holiday on her own to Texas and then just ends up living in a hostel, working in a record store and selling E's at the age of 15. This was just after she'd permanently left school after attending more of a dozen different schools. She said she would always find the kids around her too immature and so then make friends with the sixth formers, and then when they would leave, she would become unfocused and not want to continue her studies. She would never do her homework and apparently ran crying from every exam. She'd also worked as a barwoman, florist. She was a bit part in the Kate Blanchett film Elizabeth, had been a PR girl, but through the sheer amount of confidence and some great songwriting skills, she is now about to become one of the biggest stars of the 2000s, working with the producer Greg Kurstin, who will guide her to fame, and Mark Ronson, about to become one of the biggest producers of the 2000s, right along with her. We will talk more about her stratospheric rise to fame when Smile next week climbs up these charts. But first, we are about to head into the top 10. 4 songs to keep an eye out as we do that. Although Liliane is the highest new entry, there is a number of songs moving up this chart after coming on downloads alone last week. Sexy Love by Neo, Buttons by the Pussycat Dolls, and She Moves in Her Own Way by the Kooks, also battling for that top spot. Hips Don't Lie by Shakira, which, despite being in its month in the chart, is going from strength to strength on sales. So let's see who's ended where.
12.
Pink with Who Knew.
I know better.
Who knew that could last 6 weeks on this chart? At
11.
The Zootons are asking us, why won't you come on over, Valerie? I don't know. Because Take Me Out's on the telly. Fuck off, the Zootons.
Why don't you come on over?
The top 10.
Valerie by the Zootons have been on the chart for 3 weeks, as has Muse's Supermassive Black Hole, which is much better than the Supermassive Black Shite. That is their new album, according to all of the reviews of it. My feelings about them being validated.
9.
From Paris to Berlin by Infernal, 12 weeks that's been on the chart, all but one of them in the top 10. Interrailing between France and Germany, never been more popular in the UK.
From Paris to Berlin.
8.
Mash Canada by Sergio Mendes and the Black Eyed Peas, dropping 2 places in its 3rd week.
7.
The first of those songs coming on the downloads to enter the top 10 is the Kooks, with She Moves in Her Own Way.
Moving on to better things.
This means that they have broken their streak of every single going into the chart higher than the last. This song not able to beat Naive, a top 5 hit. Very much could claim that they have done an awesome, the success of that earlier song slightly overshadowing their second single, even though perfectly released to put She Moves in Her Own Way, such a summery indie track, out in July.
6.
Is Monster by the Automatic, taking us to the top 5 with last week's number 21, Sexy Love by Neo.
5.
Make me say.
Not quite able to match the leap from number 18 to number 1 that his first track, So Sick, managed. But Chartwatch blog saw this as being helped by hot weather in 2006 as well. American R&B balladry such as this tends to have only sporadic runs at success in this country, depending largely on the climate. With the release of Sexy Love coinciding with a very welcome heatwave, it provides the perfect soundtrack to lazy weekend afternoons and evenings spent in riverside bars. Under those circumstances, it could hardly fail. I would say any bar playing Sexy Love by Neo is one you want to leave quite soon, because there'll be a mass wave of straight couples fingering each other on the dance floor. Yes, fingering each other Happy Pride Month.
4,
Another MySpace girl, Sandy Tom, I wish I was a punk rocker. She's going to have less of an impact on British pop culture than Lily Allen, it has to be said. I bet she was furious the day that she first heard the name Lily Allen.
69.
That leads us for a 3-horse race, and it's a 3-female race. This is probably the first time in this podcast where we've had 4 female artists in the top 4 places. We love to see it.
3,
Is the Pussycat Dolls and Snoop Dogg.
But you keep running.
That rising 8 places in its second week. Amazingly, their lowest charting song to date. We had Pussycat Doll Mania in 2006. How shortly it would last. That leaves us with last week's number 1 and number 2 were Hips Don't Lie at number 2 and Maneater at number 1. And, would you believe it, they've swapped places. Maneater is at number 2 in its 5th week.
2,
And Shakira has got her first number 1, Hips Don't Lie, in its month on the chart. It sold 33,000 copies and it is at number 1. I never really knew that she could dance like this. All the way to the top spot, beating the number 2 peak of Whenever Wherever. Not only is the top 4 dominated by female artists, but this is the first time where we've had three female-fronted, that is hard to say, 3 female-fronted number 1s in a row in this chart since, would you believe it, 1988. The last time this happened was when Whitney, Enya and Robin Beck had back-to-back number 1s 18 years before 2006. It's girl power at the top.
Take it from us. It's girl power.
Although unfortunately we do have to spoil it slightly by mentioning that this makes it the 3rd number 1 hit that Wyclef Jean has featured on after his 2 tracks with the Fugees, Killing Me Softly and Ready or Not. But is Shakira ready for a 2nd week at number 1? We'll find out in the next episode, where she'll be facing off against George Michael, Bob Sinclair, Paolo Nutini, and one of my favourite songs of 2006, Voodoo Child by the Rogue Traders. God, remember that song? What a time it is to be alive, 2006. It's going from strength to strength. I think this is the most solid year for just pure great dance music that we've had on the entire run of this podcast, which is great because 2004 and 2005 were pretty ropey, let's be honest. But what a great way to advertise that. If you want to hear our episodes about 2004 and the first half of 2005, they are only available on our Patreon, where for £3 a month you get those and many other bonus features. Our bonus series, where we're ranking the number 1 hits from each year in the 2000s. We have just released the first part of the number 1s of the year 2000. Also, on that feed is my YouTube video about Madonna's track Sorry, which is only available to my YouTube subscribers and my Patreon subscribers. If you want to know all the other stuff that we're doing, check out my website, the 2000chartshow.wordpress.com. But enough of my male voice. Let's bask in this summer of women. And this week's number 1, 20 years ago, Hips Don't Lie by Shakira. See you next time.
Don't you see, baby, this is perfection.